Communist China continues its campaign of aggression in its quest to unseat the U.S. as the world's sole superpower. Whether it's TikTok stealing Americans' data or their manipulation of currency, unfair trade practices, and even encouraging domestic unrest, there's no low that Beijing doesn't seem like it's willing to stoop to in order to undermine our nation's future. To discuss all this and more, I'm joined by the author of The Coming Collapse of China, Gordon Chang, also author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War. Gordon, so good to see you.
Thank you so much, Buck.
So there's a lot here, Gordon, but let's start with election interference, because we heard so much about that with regard to Russia starting in 2016. Really, after Hillary lost the 2016 election is when we started hearing a lot about it. But you've been raising alarms about how China was trying to influence this most recent election. Please tell us what you've got.
Well, first of all, the Chinese Foreign Ministry and the Communist Party's Global Times engaged in malicious disinformation campaigns all through this year. And they were directed to unseating President Trump. But there were also the underground troll farms, the bots, and they were working against the president as well. So, for instance, Spamouflage Dragon, which is a large network that was active on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, was going after the president. We know that China's operations were large. Twitter, for instance, took down 174,000 fake Chinese accounts in 1 month. The New York Times reported about text messages and social media feeds spreading rumors that China knew was false about coronavirus. Didn't put the president in a good light. So there is a lot that Beijing did this year to make sure that the president did not get reelected.
Now, Gordon, people are also looking at the timeline. You mentioned COVID and what China knew and what it was telling the rest of the world. Can you just tell everyone watching this right now, what were some of the steps that they took that showed a disregard for the rest of the world's safety in the early days of the pandemic? And then I want to ask you about how China's doing with it now. But first, let's go back to the beginning.
Well, there were three things. First of all, China lied about the contagiousness of the disease. China pressured countries to accept arrivals from China. And then China downplayed the severity of the disease. Beijing admitted for the first time that the coronavirus was contagious on January 20. But doctors in Wuhan, the epicenter, knew no later than the second week of December, and they may have even known in August, as a Harvard Medical School study suggests. Now, if China had said nothing during this time, that would have been grossly irresponsible. But the Chinese tried to convince the world that it was not readily transmissible from one human to the next. So this was active deception. And at the same time, Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, pressured countries to not impose travel restrictions and quarantines on arrivals from China when he was imposing these same measures internally. So he knew these measures were effective, and yet he was forcing them to accept passengers from China who spread the disease. So, Buck, this was an intentional spreading of the coronavirus beyond China's borders. That meant China wanted people to be infected and to die, and that is murderous.
Now, Gordon, you've said before that China's acts here were obviously beyond the pale, and also when you add this to what they've done here, what you've laid out in terms of election interference, do you view these as what could be considered acts of war?
Killing 278,000 Americans as of today strikes me as an act of war. But there were other ones as well. So, for instance, Radio Free Asia is reporting that an intelligence unit of the People's Liberation Army based themselves in the now closed Houston consulate. And from there, they used big data and artificial intelligence to identify Americans likely to participate in riots, specifically what we saw this spring. And then the Chinese military sent out through TikTok videos on how to riot. So this was more than just subversion, Buck. This was an act of war.
And Gordon, you mentioned TikTok. We had heard from the president that there was going to be some kind of a forced sale. I mean, back in July, CNN, TikTok is a national security threat, U.S. politicians say. CNN had this piece. And we were told that there was going to be a sale to an American company. Where does that stand? This kind of fell off the headlines.
Well, on December 14th, there's a hearing in federal court about President Trump's forced divestiture of TikTok. But federal district judges have stayed his order. He's trying to arrange a sale, perhaps to Oracle, maybe to Walmart, some sort of combination of that. But China has acted to block that by new regulations on the export of technology. And TikTok has a lot of technology covered by those new rules. So this is one area where the president's efforts have been failing. What the president should have done early on is, instead of trying to arrange a sale, he just should have banned it. And that would have been much cleaner, and he would have had stronger legal arguments. Now, this drama is not over, but the president does not seem to be winning this one.
Gordon, the president's got his plate full these days with a lot of things. Tell me this, how is China doing right now with COVID-19? Because we see U.S. cases, all-time high for deaths. Europe is having the same problems we are, so it's clearly not just an America thing. This has hit the Western world very hard. China, it seems like they're going back to normal more than we are, or is that just propaganda? What's happening?
Well, I think that they're more back to normal than we are, but probably they are hiding cases, and a substantial number of them. In January 26th, the Communist Party appointed its task force on the coronavirus, and the 9-person roster had only one public health official. The rest of them were propaganda workers, as China calls them, or party hacks, which shows you the priorities of the Communist Party on this. That was to control the narrative. So I think that we are seeing outbreaks of cases in China. They're probably more severe, much more severe than Beijing is talking about. But yeah, I mean, they don't have as bad a time of it now as we do.
And what are your thoughts about the possibility of a Biden administration here and its shift, its pivot on China? What do you think that will mean? How do you think the Chinese Communist Party will view that?
Well, I think that they're happy that the outcome of November 3, or at least the apparent outcome. One thing we know, regardless of what Joe Biden himself thinks about China, every new occupant of the White House gives China a grace period. Every administration thinks that it can do better than the predecessor. Now, that Trump gave them about a 14-month grace period. The difference between 2017 and 2021, however, is that now we don't have a moment to lose, because China's attacks have become more malicious, certainly unrelenting. And so right now we're at great peril, because although Americans don't realize this, our republic is at risk. And we're in an existential conflict with China where there's only going to be one survivor. It's either going to be the People's Republic of China or the United States of America, not both. China last year declared a quote unquote people's war on us. They consider us an enemy, and they are willing to kill us. So this is important for us to understand the fundamental nature of this challenge.
To follow more of Gordon's analysis, you can see him on Twitter, Gordon G. Chang. Also pick up his latest booklet, The Great U.S.-China Tech War. Gordon, always good to see you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Buck.
Hey, Team Buck, just want to say thanks so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more great content from The First, please click that subscribe button.